Hello, seventh graders. This is Mr. Shear, and this topic today is kind of a quick overview of the War of 1812, which happened, spoiler alert, in 1812. So you have guided notes that go along with this video. Your job is to fill those notes out as we move through the video, and I talk a little bit more about the backdrop very briefly about the war in my other video. So just kind of to bring you up to date, we became a country in 1776 when we fought for our independence against Britain, and the War of 1812 is the United States versus Britain again, but this time Britain has allies in the form of Native American tribes. So it's the U.S. versus Britain and a Native American tribe coalition, a group of Native Americans. So we're going to start with the causes of the war, and just for a little backdrop, at this time, Britain and France are locked in their own battle. And Britain is the world superpower. And Britain, needing soldiers and sailors to fight the French, is doing what they call impressment. British are stopping American ships and forcing American sailors into the British Navy. So if you look at this picture here, you can see a British officer pointing a gun at an American sailor because they are literally, the British are boarding our boats, using weapons to take American sailors and make them British soldiers. It's kidnapping. So of course, it tells you a lot about how the British viewed the Americans at this time, and of course is very unpopular throughout the United States. So another thing that's happening is Britain is seizing American ships landing in French ports. And this is a violation of neutral rights. They're also taking our cargo. So the United States is shipping goods to France. The British are just taking our boats and our stuff. And they're not allowing American ships even really to land in France. It's basically piracy. So the United States tries something called the Embargo Act of 1807. And this was an attempt to solve the problem diplomatically by closing all American ports to foreign trade. But this is kind of a disaster for the U.S. It's hugely unpopular. And the reason for that is what this embargo says is, hey, nobody can land in the U.S. and trade their goods with us. So it's actually detrimental to U.S. businesses, and it's very unpopular. And it doesn't solve anything, and it doesn't stop the British from doing what they want. So I want to give you just a quick map here of what the United States is in 1812. The United States is these green states. This is the Ohio Territory here. You have Indian Territory next to the Michigan Territory here. This is a coalition of Native American tribes. This is where Tecumseh will come from. And then you have this whole Louisiana Purchase area here, which we just bought in 1803, 9 years prior. Jefferson purchased from France. And then, of course, you've got the Oregon Territory. Hey, I can see my house from here. Where Washington is, which we've been talking about extensively in this class. So take a look at this map, and really the war is going to be happening mostly in this Ohio and Indian Territory. Now, as mentioned, one of the causes of the war is a Shawnee chief by the name of Tecumseh is growing increasingly frustrated with two things. First, the death of Native Americans across the continent due to diseases like smallpox and measles. And second, the United States encroaching on Native American land. We've got people settling farther and farther west. And Tecumseh correctly realizes that individual tribes cannot beat the United States. And so what he wants to do is he wants to form agreements with all the tribes. And up until this point, many Native tribes fought each other. He wants to unite all the tribes in a coordinated effort to defeat the United States in order to create a country for Native Americans. So if we jump back to this map, he wants this whole pink area to basically be its own Native American country. Well, in order to fight the United States, Tecumseh needs weapons, guns, etc., and he gets them from the British. So the British are arming the Native Americans because the British want to keep the United States from expanding west. And as a quick aside, Tecumseh unfortunately dies pretty early in the war, and with him dies the dream of the Native Americans having their own country. We'll talk specifically about Tecumseh all tomorrow, But I just want to point out one name. William Henry Harrison is the United States governor of that Indian territory, and that's really, it's Tecumseh versus Harrison in many ways. Harrison is his arch nemesis and the man he views as the power, the United States power in his territory. And so please note the name William Henry Harrison. And fun fact, William Henry Harrison goes on to be a president of the United States, but he is sick when he wins the presidency, and he actually only serves 1 month before dying in office. That's later on. Tecumseh himself is killed. He loses 2 big battles, one at the Battle of Tippecanoe and one on the Battle of the Thames, where he dies. Okay, so again, the goal is for the Indians, for the Native Americans, the goal is to have their own country here. The British like that goal because it would block the United States in and keep us from expanding all the way out here, and the British want to keep this Oregon territory for themselves. They want this area where we live. Other causes is the British have refused to leave the Ohio River Valley. They're trying to limit United States expansion into the West. And it's also a matter of pride for them. They view the United States, even though we have our independence, as kind of the little brother that they don't want to let grow up. They're the strongest fighting force in the world, and they believe that they can push around the United States. So the president at the time is James Madison, and he is a supporter of the war. And in 1812, he officially asked Congress for a declaration of war. Now I'm going to take you into just a few quick battles, and we'll spend more time on some of these later next week. So the Battle of York is an early U.S. victory, and it's in modern-day Toronto in Canada, and it's in 1813. And the United States fights bravely, and not only do we win this battle, the Battle of York, but we actually then destroy the entire village of York, which is now Toronto, and it's pretty brutal. So we're very proud of ourselves. There's a lot of patriotism, and we surprise the British by winning a major battle. Troops do loot and burn the fort and the town and the capital city. Well, the British retaliate. And because we burned their capital of their territory, which was York, they decide that they need to destroy our capital. And in August 1814, the British capture our Capitol building in Washington, D.C., at the time the White House, and they end up setting fire and destroying the whole Capitol. They actually, we'll talk more about this later, but they have dinner in the building first. They're throwing dishes on the floor. They vandalize our Capitol, and then they set it on fire and destroy it. James Madison escapes before the British arrive in town. We see the British coming. He's able to escape. And his wife, Dolly, saves many valuables, famous paintings and artifacts that are now the United States Constitution, but a painting of George Washington, etc. We'll talk more about that later. All right, the next major battle is the Battle of Fort McHenry. And that's where the British advanced to Baltimore. And they bombed Fort McHenry in September of 1814. So 1 year after they destroy the capital, now they're feeling like they can consolidate and take out Baltimore, which is where most of the boats are built at this time in the United States. Most of our military boats are built in Baltimore, and they feel like this will be a death blow if they win. However, the United States holds the British off, and Francis Scott Key witnesses the entire event from a boat in the harbor. He witnesses the entire battle, and he writes the Star-Spangled Banner, which becomes our national anthem. This victory at Fort McHenry is huge. And again, this is a very quick overview of the war, but it's a huge victory. It turns the tides for the Americans. It shows the British that this is not going to be a quick war, and the British decide that this is going to be too expensive to continue after 3 years of fighting, and they agree to the Treaty of Ghent. And after battles across all of North America, a treaty is negotiated in December of 1814. Basically, the war ends in a stalemate, with neither side gaining or losing territory. And the big deal here is that the United States doesn't necessarily win, but we do hold the British off. And we lose about twice as many soldiers. We lose about 15,000 U.S. soldiers in this war. The British only lose about 8,000. So some historians say the British actually won, but they don't completely defeat us. We hold our own against the world's largest army. And because they're in a battle, Britain is, with France, they basically decide this is too expensive, and they agree to our terms. Except it takes time. The Treaty of Ghent is signed in Europe, and it takes time for the information to come back to the United States. It takes months by boat. No telephones, no telegraphs, nothing to travel across the ocean. So it takes months for the information to come back to the United States. And after a treaty is signed, there's one more epic battle, which is the Battle of New Orleans. And we'll talk about that in a separate meet. But this is the rise of Andrew Jackson. So this battle actually happens after the war is already declared over, and the British invade New Orleans. So word of the treaty has not yet reached New Orleans. In January of 1815, General Andrew Jackson decisively defeats the invading British. This is a crazy story in and of itself, and I'll tell you that story at a separate meet. But it makes Andrew Jackson a national hero. And of course, he will go on to become President of the United States, and he's the gentleman on the $20 bill. So we are going to talk about the effects of the war a couple days from now in its own meet. Once we go specifically into more of the battles, more of the big events of this war, we'll then talk about the effects of the war in a separate meet. So I'm going to leave it at this for now. And again, if you need to go back and rewatch the video, pause. Your job is to fill out your guided notes. That is your assignment. Thanks as always for watching, 7th graders, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.